对，我很希望有一款游戏是可以《暗黑2》真的它继承它的进化版。
So I was lucky enough to be able to fly to LA and try out Path of Exile 2.
他是受访，像我之前《暗黑破坏神4》去试玩一样，对不对？哦，懂了。
In my state was able to very quickly. Now I am somewhat new in Path of Exile. I've got about 800 hours into it, but even me in my state was able to very quickly realize
他已经打了好几个小时了，
is fundamentally a lot different in gameplay than Path of Exile 1. And we're gonna do it. The game opens up with 3 different classes that you can play.
所以可以选3个职业，对不对
There was Sorceress, Ranger, and Warrior. And if you know anything about me, I'm not
战士。
a bow classes that you can play. There was Sorceress, Ranger, and Warrior. And if you know anything about me, I'm not a bow Andy. I'm not going to play a Ranger. So I was like, give me the character that's got a mace and a shield. That seems for me. And part of the reason I picked that is because they announced while I was there that the Warrior actually had a new mechanic that was being showcased, where the shield itself, you could hold the right click. I was using WASD.
他就说这个战士啊，为什么选战士来玩呢？他说因为战士现在可以拿那个盾牌这样挡着。
Point where the cursor is going, and your character would hold the shield up and actually block all projectiles and damage coming from that direction. And you had this bit of a stamina bar that allows you to absorb damage up to a certain point.
精力条被打了会扣精力条而已。
Really cool way of avoiding damage that I thought I would like quite a bit. I ended up actually swapping out of the shield to a two-handed weapon because I realized there's the spacebar dodge roll that gives you iframes. And I was
好帅哦！他现在就是换成双手剑了。
So dumb for having the shield and blocking everything when I can just dodge out of the way.
我蛮喜欢他打斗的画面诶。
Still have movement happening.
不知道怎么讲，就觉得他的动作是蛮精细的。
So I ended up just ending up with a two-handed mace regardless. But I do think the shield was quite cool. In fact, you can even shield rush charge with the shield that allows you to block projectiles while you're rushing with the shield. Really, really cool mechanic with the warrior. So if you're somebody who likes a sword and shield or a sword and board style, then you are probably going to like this shield style of warrior. And plus, with the weapon swap mechanic in Path of Exile 2 is a big focal point in the game. Then you probably have a two-handed weapon and a sword and board style.
基本上盾牌就是这一次的特点啊。那如果你喜欢那种，他就是讲你喜欢那种中古那种设计的话，你应该会喜欢这个盾牌。
can swap between them depending upon if you need sword and shield or if you're just trying to DPS. Now, right off the bat, the game opens up and it is difficult from the get-go. I don't know if they had the difficulty pretty high or if I'm just bad or if this is the way that is intended, but the potions do not refill from killing normal monsters. You only refill them from magic and rare monsters. And also,
药剂只有打那个特殊怪才会毁，打一般怪不会毁。
When you die, then you have to respawn at a checkpoint or in town. And when you do that, it respawns all of the minions on the map. So any of the progress that you would have made walking forward on that map would have been wiped out when you respawn, meaning that you need to be able to progress.
POE1 的野蛮人很废，所以说现在给他加盾牌。谢谢。
Through the map with your character at hand in order to be able to continue, or otherwise you die, you're going to have to do it all over again. Now, while this might sound somewhat annoying, I actually ended up quite liking this mechanic because first of all, it feels like a little bit of accomplishment when you
蛮好玩的感觉啊，就这个盾牌蛮酷的，很像圣骑士哎。
beat the map in one go without like dying, getting halfway through. Okay, now I only have to do the back half on this life. You do have to beat the map sort of as intended. On the other side of it, it almost had like this built-in catch-up mechanic where if you are dying and having to reset the map and do it over and over again in the axe, then you're getting more experience and the loot that comes with that. And then eventually
你死的时候，它会重置地图啊。
you're sort of caught up and it won't be a problem. And eventually I got to the point by Act 2 where I was just one-shotting almost everything, stun-locking the bosses, and just comboing stuff out with the two-handed mace.
他说他不知道他的他好像不确定他的难度是多少，反正他就一直打就对，打到这边。他前面有讲难度的问题。
Really, really strong. But in the beginning, it was rather difficult, and I feel like I needed those extra levels. One other thing I noticed that I did not like when I was testing the game was the consistent having to go back to town to get the potions. For instance, the sorceress was having this problem I was noticing.
他必须要一直回去，就是没有魔水啦，要一直回去拿，不知道回去哪了拿。
With mana, people kept having to go back to town, and they were complaining about, man, I have to go back to
就
town.
你要一直回城，回城去补魔水。
With HP, because I'm always up there in the front.
因为他说的就是小怪不会帮你回，只有那个精英特殊怪，就是蓝怪啊，还有什么精英怪吧。我是没打过 POE。
Damage, I'm going to need to go back to town to get health potions. So it felt very disruptive because you have like a casting animation you do. it's no longer an instant portal. So because of that, I'm having to like wait for an opening to cast the animation during the boss fight, so I can go back to town and click on the well to refill the potion. This seemed like fairly involved in the test as far as I could tell. So this is probably
那个他设计还设计那个井水在那个传送点旁边，可是应该这样太麻烦了。
going to change, I would imagine, before launch.
你要嘛就像那个《暗黑破坏神2》一样，一直给你，你可以去买水，买一大堆水在身上。
Something I liked for sure was that the game definitely seemed to explain things better than Path of Exile 1. From the beginning, the concepts in
他说整件事他们解释的比较清楚啊，跟暗黑不是 sorry， 跟 POE 比 POE 第一代比。
The game were almost explaining themselves
他说
to you. For instance, the boss
从头到尾，从头开始都有分享啊。我是听说 POE 蛮复杂的。
red, so you know your shield ain't going to be able to block that. That is in fact an unblockable attack, and that's a mechanic.
我个人觉得这个不错，就是要写到底要这个东西是干嘛的。刚才说可能逃脱啊，然后或者就是很多细节，很多内容都有记录在里面，我觉得蛮重要。这个是龙族那个交易2，我个人觉得是好的地方，它很多 explanation 很多解释，就是说这件事会怎么样，这件事要怎么样，我觉得对一个新手玩家比较 friendly。
That's in a lot of games. So some of these were fairly intuitive from the beginning. Some of them were not intuitive, however. For instance, the way skill gems work. You right-click on an uncut gem, you can cut it into a gem, you get to pick, and that was all fine and dandy. But then the skill gems themselves...
可以，我不知道这是什么，反正是可以割那个宝石，不是切宝石，不是
at least for the warrior, were locked to individual weapons, meaning I had a lot of mace weapons by time, or mace skills by time I was like level 10, 15, etc. So when I got like a good axe drop, I was like, oh, awesome, log in, boys, I got a good axe. But then I go to equip.
有一部分是我没有玩过 POE 啦，所以说它有些东西我不懂，它这个像宝石啊，是到底可以干嘛？是可以切，是不是？
And suddenly I have 0 usable skills because all of my abilities are for the mace, and I didn't really know what I could do about that. I just kind of stuck to mace the whole time, and I have 0 usable skills because all of my abilities are for the mace, and I didn't.
就是说，是不是？虽然这个宝石可以使用，但你就只能使用在，有时候你只有这个武器的话，你就只能用在这个上面，其他你也不能用。所以说，到底这个用处在干嘛 ？I don't know。我觉得这是测试阶段啊，没有什么事情。不一定，很多事情可能官方都没办法透露，所以说他们应该只有玩1-2章。他说他玩到第2章。
Really know what I could do about that. I just kind of stuck to mace the whole time because I couldn't.
他就只能拿锤子而已。流星锤，流星。
So there were some things that feel fundamentally either.
I like this picture. 我觉得他的，我很喜欢这个游戏，感觉很有暗黑2的感觉。对，我很希望有一款游戏是可以暗黑2真的它继承它的进化版。重置版的这种进化版，拜托。
Ill-explained or were not intuitive. Most of those things, however, were related to either the UI or understanding how the skills work, etc. But the thing that was the most intuitive was the combat. The bosses make sense when you are fighting them.
他就是在讲说，大部分时候我们都在讲这些画面啊，或者是数值啊，但是他觉得现在讲的是大王。
You can tell, okay, this is where the hitbox is. This is where I'm supposed to avoid. You can understand what the mobs that you're fighting are about to do. They are very fairly telegraphed.
就是说，他说这打王的时候，王的动作是很清楚、很明确，有点，我觉得可能有点像艾尔登法环嘛。艾尔登法环其实王他要做某一个动作的时候，都会有一个前摇。他说现在就是让你可以反应，但是这样子的话可以让有技术的玩家可以展现出来。
So I felt like the combat, in my opinion, was some of the most enjoyable combat that I've had in almost any ARPG. It's almost what I was hoping.
我觉得他的感觉跟《暗黑破坏神4》没那么像，我不知道为什么。他跟《暗黑破坏神2》的感觉比较像，《暗黑破坏神4》跟《暗黑破坏神3》根本就是一个模子的，有些真的是太像了。但是他这个没有，这有点像《暗黑破坏神2》rescale， 就是怎么讲呢？重新把人物的大小的比例再跟怪对齐那种感觉嘛。
Diablo 4's gameplay was going to be like: slow, dark, and gritty. Now, I actually enjoyed this a lot because it felt more methodical. The word that I would use is intentional. It seems like the game wants you to have intentional movement. Think about every action you're actually performing in the game. For instance, when I'm playing the warrior, there was literally one ability that took 2.32 seconds in order to be able to cast. I'm talking a full 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, and that's how long it took to even get that ability out. And I caution away from saying this, but it reminded me mostly of Ruthless in Path of Exile 1. The drops were definitely fewer and far between though, but by the time I started to
我一直在看他打斗的画面 ，sorry， 太投入了。我觉得他这个打起来看起来真的蛮好玩，不知道怎么讲不知道怎么讲，就是他人的动作的这个动作是有，虽然我最近玩艾尔登法环了吧，就把它缩小版的感觉，然后人会再加上一些暗黑2的元素，这样。
To pick up quite a bit more, so I think that was only an early game thing. The combat was definitely much more. Each of the pack of mobs were dangerous. It wasn't just like, okay, I have to fight 50,000 mobs to get the next map. Let me just blow through them. Like I was thinking about each one of the fights. Well, at least until Act 2 when I got a 2.
他说你会去蛮专心在每一次的打斗之中，然后前面都在稍微形容说这个打斗的感觉是怎么样了。
To make some skill points on the tree, and I started literally.
对，应该就是说比较精细，看起来打起来比较精细。它的解剖学来讲，就是说他人的身体的关节是有在动的啦。那没有说有时候你看其他游戏，它的动的关节就只有单关节运动，对不对？它没有多关节运动。像我们有3个，这样子看起来比较协调啊，没有就这样子而已，就是人只有这样子转。
One-shotting everything with my two-handed mace. It just took a few good rows. So I think you're only going to feel that way, and it's going to feel slow.
我很想要玩双手武器强的。我暗黑破坏神四，我暗黑破坏神四野蛮人的双手武器。我那时候刚玩的时候，刚开始的时候玩，我不知道后来有没有变很强，就觉得希望有一个真的不错双手武器的爽感啦。
Sort of back to blasting already. So if you're worried that Path of Exile 2 is going to be a completely different experience, you're not just going to be able to shred mobs, etc. I think it's only going to be that way until you get your character more built out. For me, the highlight of being able to play it was very easily the bosses. The bosses themselves were all fundamentally unique. Each of them had their own personality.
他说每一个王都是非常非常特别的，而且独立的个性，可能他有很特别的故事吧之类的。所以他才有特别的个性，他是讲个性啊。
Each of them had their own combat style. Each of them had their own mechanics in which I had to learn. And until I was able to stun lock them with the two-handed mace, they actually all felt decently difficult. Jonathan Rogers said in one of the interviews that he wants people to die twice, and that the third time they are able to defeat the bosses. And that does seem very apparent when you actually play the game.
他说希望大家在打王的时候，你可以死2次就好，然后第3次希望你都可以打赢，他是这样设计的。
That has been tuned to make you die a couple times to figure it out, and then you go and you're like, okay, I got it this time, and then you can avoid the mechanics, etc. As you
有没有？你是可以闪的。
Boss fights felt difficult but fair. They are also very well themed. There was one boss fight where the guy turns into a wolf, and then he's running around the map, and has other minions that come out with him, and that seemed really cool. There was a boss that was like an.
他就在解释这整件事。现在你的画面就对，就是有一个王，然后旁边有一些小怪冲出来。
Executioner that is using a giant axe, and he actually starts the fight by chopping off the head of somebody and then coming at you with an axe. So there's all kinds of different style of bosses, and there's over 100 unique bosses.
他说我好像不一样，很不一样的打法，就是说你什么要把头切掉才能这样子。所以我也没有在玩过 POE， 我也不是他。可能有点片段，不能完全理解在讲什么。
In Path of Exile 2, and if all of them were at the level of what I saw just going through the first 2 acts, that is actually going to be fairly impressive. They released a lot of new information when I was there. One of it, in fact, was that there's actually mounts coming to the game, which is a cool little thing that got snuck in. You can actually run in it.
我觉得这很像暗黑2的感觉，这是不一样。他的人，暗黑2的人的比例是比较小的，然后对于这个怪的比例也是这样。所以说，一个画面可以塞像这样子成堆的尸体，打起来就觉得很有爽感。接暗黑2的牛嘛，全部死掉，我觉得那个打真的可以打到感觉一只1杀100的感觉。
attack from the top of a mount. So if you're a ranger with a bow, you can literally cast bow shots while you're riding on a mount, and that was completely new. But they also showed how interactions. So for instance, you can lay like toxic spores on the ground.
感觉很好玩呢，我的天哪！
With your own poison, they turn into like poison mines. You can have flowers that shoot out tentacles.
但我觉得他感觉有参考一下。
Monsters around there, but you can actually poison and shoot the flower itself, increasing the amount of poison that the flower has when it attacks everybody. There's a lot of built-in combo-based mechanics that make individual moves interact with each other. That is very different than the style of Path of Exile 1.
它是很需要一些技巧的。 这游戏是需要点技巧，像他那个边打边走，我觉得它的设计起来就是说，有一些人虽然装备没有那么好，但是如果你技巧不错的话，一样是可以打得不错。
Path of Exile 1, I feel like I'm picking an ability, ramping it, and jacking it to the tits to make it as strong as I possibly can, so it one-shots everything on the entire screen. Whereas in Path of Exile 2, again, the word comes back to intentional. I feel like I'm getting mobs together, grouping them up for a combo, laying down combo 1, piecing it together.
他的意思就是说，在 POE1， 他觉得好像是你就是一招很强，然后一招一直狂升，把某一招练很强之后，然后全部收头。可是他觉得 POE2 呢，虽然你是找一群怪，但是你是用你技能的 combo 把它打掉。当然，他只有玩一部分啦。
Together with combo 2, what have you. And that is a very different way of approaching the combat than I have seen in the original game. In fact, when I'm fighting the bosses, one of the things I'm looking at is the stagger bar. When I'm playing my two-handed mace, I'm slowly staggering and building up this stagger bar. And each of the bosses have a unique animation of them staggering backwards when you actually fulfill that stagger bar, which gives you an opportunity to further attack them safely because they are staggered. So
就是它上面有一个那个 bar，right， 那个 stagger bar， 它就说那个条啦。 然后你可能慢慢打了之后，你就有机会去，应该是打出一个比较特别的攻击吧，或者是你比较不会被打。我觉得这个可能要查证一下。
So I found the game itself to be much more interactive in each of the combat scenarios as opposed to just spam the one button and stay out of the red circle. It ends up becoming like, let me worry about the stagger bar, let me worry about the combo, let me dodge the combo.
就是它里面有很多细节啦，就是他打的时候很多细节，你要想象他的王是怎么样打，我是怎么玩的啊，然后上面有 stagger bar 在跑在哪里，就比较多细节，比较多操作。 我不确定，我觉得看起来蛮好玩的。我觉得游戏还是要一些操作了，但是操作的他们控制就是说，像他们的应该是制作人或者是里面的游戏的总监之类的吗？说至少你死3次就是有机会很了解王的习性，不会说你怎么打都打不过，爱尔登法环狂死这样。
doing. I actually felt like the combat in Path of Exile 2 has probably been my favorite combat out of any ARPG so far. And if I was comparing the combat in Path of Exile 2 to any other ARPG, I would have a hard time doing it. It actually reminded me more of No Rest for the Wicked, which is closer to a Souls-like game than anything. Now, this might sound, if you're a POE1 player, like it is almost totally different, but I think this is mostly at the start of the game. You do still have the way itemization works. You can still slam items.
他的意思是说，反正这个打击是他非常喜欢的啦。对，跟其他 ARPG 的游戏比 ，POE2 他最近玩是觉得他最喜欢的。然后他现在解释，可能跟 POE1 有一些 POE1 的原汁原味还在，但也增加了一些新的东西。
You can still roll crazy DPS stats, and I was getting like double my DPS when I got the new weapon upgrade. So you're going to be blasting through with the higher axe, no doubt. But in the beginning of the game, the impact of each of the individual fights and the boss fights felt difficult and just really strong and memorable, which for me was an improvement over a lot of the other ARPGs.
他说一开始打王的时候不是很好打的啦，但他觉得是不错的。 可能难度变高，我没玩过 POE1 啦，所以说这有点难去想象。
I've played where it's maybe I thought, oh, that was a cool, well-designed boss fight, but then what I'm doing, my part in the boss fight would be like extremely boring in some of these other games. Whereas in Path of Exile 2, I feel like my combat's good. What I'm worried about with the boss is good. The audio and the music is very good. The impactfulness and the theme of each of the boss fights are very good, and they're all fairly unique. So I have.
反正就是说你会在意。 你自己在意网，然后整体音乐什么都很好的意思，所以他现在是很觉得这个游戏 very good，
high praise for the boss fights. They're definitely going to have to do some balancing. I got to a point where my two-handed mace could like stun lock some of the bosses. There's definitely some bugs and some issues with them getting stuck on things, and I saw this multiple times while I was there. But for the most part, I think that is just alpha testing stuff that will be fixed upon release of the game.
他说还是有很多 bugs 的，但是他这应该是会反正就是还在封测嘛，封测阶段。
And I'm sure it's going to be much more flushed out. I did want to take a moment to mention that WASD felt a lot better than I thought it was going to feel. There's some moment to mention that WASD
走路是用 WASD 吗？
felt a lot better than I thought it was going to feel. There are some complaints about hotkeys, and that would be true. I'm sure that you could use an MMO mouse, but not.
应该是你可以选择两种模式，一种是用 WASD 去上下左右，一个就是用你的滑鼠。
Everyone may want to do that. So using WASD while trying to use like QERT, etc., might be somewhat difficult while you're also moving. But the way the WASD works with your character facing where your mouse is pointed, that's actually quite important for things like shield.
你就可以边打游戏边讲电话，然后WASD 啦 Q 什么 QERTF，Hello 这样子，然后边单手这样子边玩。
Fields, for instance, and felt correct. It felt like I was strafing as opposed to just like keyboard turning in World of Warcraft, for instance. So WASD felt significantly better than I thought it was going to, and it makes sense now.
比他想象中还好，他用
that is what almost everybody internally has been using over there as well, because it feels very smooth. So a moment here to talk about in-game towards the end of this video. They did not show us the in-game while I was there. We got about 4.
他们没有说最后期的游戏啦，他们去参加活动的时候没有。
2.5 hours of gameplay that we are allowed to do, and during that time, people were making it through Act 1, maybe 4.5 hours of video. They did not show us the in-game while I was there. We got about 4.5 hours of
4.5 hours 4个半小时去玩
gameplay that we are allowed to do, and during that time, people were making it through Act 1, maybe part of the way through Act 2. I don't think anyone actually made it to Act 3, and they did not show us footage of the in-game. So as it currently stands, the only thing that
大部分人只是打到最多第3章嘛，好像第2章打完而已。
Aware of is the early game of Path of Exile, and we are awaiting information on the in-game. It did seem, however, that going into Act
我觉得这是很刺激，因为很多就是暗黑类的博主就会再来玩这个就是蛮特别的。像当初暗黑4的时候，就是 POE 和暗黑2的。然后我们嘛，然后就是一起来玩暗黑4，我觉得那个播起来那种竞争的味道蛮特别的。但是呢，暗黑4毕竟跟 POE 比较像，那时候一开始有速通，所以说暗黑2的玩家就比较没有办法不习惯，所以速通在上面一开始就会拼看谁先冲到世界第1名嘛，就差很多。因为它比较 POE 比较太倾向于暗黑4太倾向于 POE 的用法了。
Act 2, the gear drop started to ramp, my damage started to ramp, I started to feel much stronger very quickly, and so I'm sure that is going to carry through in progression throughout the acts, and as we get more towards in-game, we might actually end up seeing more of that Path of Exile 1 style of mapping and blasting through, as it did seem like it was leading.
他是说他们因为没有玩很多啦，但是说你的人物随着章节越来越强啊，其实我觉得他应该也不知道，就是说最后面会怎么样，但是他觉得可能会慢慢更多体验到 POE1 的那种装备或技能的 combo 吧。
In that direction, but the beginning of the game is definitely going to be slower than you're used to. Overall, I enjoyed my time playing Path of Exile 2.
他说一开始不会那么快了，慢慢给你玩，我觉得这样比较好，不要一开始大家都冲那么快。
I was looking forward to Path of Exile 2, but after actually playing it, I'm looking forward to it even more.
Oh, damn!
I think that they're going to have some announcements related to Path of Exile 2 as of the posting of.
我觉得这个很酷哎
，slower than you're.
你看这个
After actually playing it, I'm looking forward to it even more. Now, I think that they're going to have some announcements related to Path of Exile 2 as of the posting of this video, so hopefully we'll actually get some more information about the game that they did not share with us at the event. But as of today, I'm very optimistic about Path of Exile 2, and I will be looking forward to playing in any of the betas.
Wow.
It's too early to give it some 1 out of whatever 10.
我一直觉得刚才那一只网很像那个艾尔登法环里面的，有没有这个很像？有没有？艾尔登法环有一个那个长这样子的怪物。
Right. It's too early to give it some 1 out of whatever 10, etc. So, at this stage of the game, I'm just going to say I'm up.
好我不知道大家的感觉是什么，我个人是觉得非常期待啊！这应该才是真正的暗黑4吧？就是暗黑2，然后 POE 就是等于暗黑3，POE2就是暗黑4，因为那个团队是一样的。我希望他们成功，对啊，赞，给你们一个赞。